So, one of the interesting things about our pandemic experience, especially early on, was that we weren't quite sure, nobody was really quite sure how dangerous it was. And there was a period there at the beginning, and I bet you all remember this, where we were getting all sorts of guidance and advice on safeguards. We had that stretch there for a while, and I bet you did this too. When you went grocery shopping, did you wipe it down with like some sort of antibacterial wipe? Like you brought in like a can of tomato soup, and that can might be what gives you it, so you'd wipe it down, and then you'd go and you try to figure out how to, you have to like wash all your fruit. Did y'all do that?
Yeah.
Okay, good. We had this kind of elaborate system because we've got teenagers where like I would bring the groceries to the door, and then there would be somebody stationed at the door for like the intermediate thing, and then it would pass down the hallway and there would be a kid wiping, and then somebody to put it in the already wiped and clean pile. It was very complex. And then right around that same time, they started recommending, I don't know if y'all heard this, but we did, that you might want to have like a separate set of shoes for when you go to the store. And you didn't want to wear those shoes in the house because you might bring something. All right, so not only are you like trying to figure out like, what do we do with these groceries? You're like kicking your shoes, And it was because we didn't know how dangerous it was. We had no idea at that time how it spread. And so they were just saying like, it could be dangerous to wear your shoes in the house, or to bring a loaf of bread in here that hasn't been wiped down with antibacterial wipes and all of that. So we start off talking a little bit about danger, and I've come to believe that we, without really knowing it, are kind of in danger. And you ask how, as you should. And I think the danger is for us in particular. Now, I'm going to look out there and make a guess that just about everybody here, except for maybe 2 or 3 people, are my age or above. So, is that a safe guess? Is that a pretty... So I'm 53. So I think I can spy a few people, 3, maybe 4 or 5, who are below my age, but you're not teenagers anymore. You're not kids anymore. And we've lived to an age, all of us in this room, where we know stuff, don't we? We know lots of stuff. We know how to get a job. We generally know how to keep a job. We kind of know how to do our taxes. We know how to drive, probably. We know how to navigate the roads around here. We know how to work a computer. We kind of know how the political system works, or the economic system works. We know how to navigate society. We know how to navigate social situations, all of that. So we know stuff, right? We're of an age where we're pretty confident in what we know. But I've noticed that this peculiar thing happens when you get to a certain age, and I am definitely of that age. And I suspect a lot of you are as well. And this is not meant to be insulting at all. But we kind of stop learning. We kind of stop intentionally and actively seeking out learning opportunities. And in fact, when we have to learn something, it annoys us. Case in point, now be honest about this. When the pandemic happened, and for those who weren't going to church, churches basically shut down for a couple years. And we all very quickly had to get up to speed on Zoom. Now, how many of you were overjoyed at the possibility of learning new technology so that we could do church in that way? Or how many of you kind of were just like, I can't believe I've got to do that? Yeah, I think most of us were not overjoyed at that learning opportunity.
We were delighted. I was delighted.
You were delighted, good.
Absolutely, because we couldn't go to church. We couldn't go anywhere. We were stuck in, and church was fabulous.
Okay. We would expect nothing less from you, Rose. Just want to say. So, But I think most of us were kind of annoyed at the technology. And more than that, it wasn't the technology, it was that we were being asked by the world and almost required, if we wanted to stay connected in any sort of way, to learn something. You know, in particular on a computer with technology, which has its own special brand of frustration. I've spent a lot of time on Zoom with most of you. And I will have to say that even though we were forced to learn it, not many of us have mastered it either. And I will offer as a case in point the look of surprise on your face almost every time you connect. It is a great delight, because almost every time there's always like, ooh, I can see somebody. And almost like, ooh, I can hear ooh, I can see myself. And there's always still like this like, is it gonna work? Do I know what I'm doing? What's it? And it's because we had to learn it, but I'm not sure any of us really were like, yes, I'm gonna master this. I'm gonna deep dive into this and figure it out. Most of us were kind of resentful, kind of like, all right, if I have to. And it reminded me a little bit of when my family got its first VCR. Now, a few people here may have never lived with VCRs. You might be of that generation where you're young enough where TiVo and all of that happened. But the first VCRs to come into homes was like, it was wild. And I remember my dad approaching. Has anyone seen the beginning of, 2001 Space Odyssey, where there's like these Neanderthals or something, like approaching this big obelisk, and they're just like, what is it? What is it? That's how my dad for years was with the VCR. He would just like come up to it like he was some sort of ape and just poke at it. And for years, the most consistent thing at my parents' house, and this is when I was grown and gone, and I would come back on the weekends and then moved away and come back a couple times a year, the most consistent thing at their house was that the darn clock on that thing blinked 12 for years, and they just had given up trying to figure out how to do it because it just annoyed them. They could have read the manual or asked somebody, can you teach me how to program the clock? No, couldn't be bothered. Just annoyed them. And in my dad's defense, though, and in our defense of not really wanting to use Zoom, there's technology out there right now that our kids are learning and are going to be comfortable with that I bet most of us are like, nah. How many of you are intentionally learning about artificial intelligence right now? And how to use it in your daily life and all of that? Yeah, most of us are shaking our heads. No. Don't want to. Not going to go there. Not going to learn it. Why? It's artificial, the name. Because we've learned enough, right? We don't need it for life. I mean, look at us. We're here, we're competent, we're successful. We basically have it figured out, right? Which is why I will say that one of the greatest spiritual dangers, I think one of the greatest risks to us as followers of Jesus, is that we think we know just about everything there is to know about faith and about Jesus and about God, and that there are probably not too many answers or questions that we don't have answers for. And I think it's a particular danger for people who maybe have been in church a long time. And not that everybody is that way, but most of us have probably been in church for a few weeks, few years, few decades. People who are just coming back to church are actually a delight, or coming to church for the first time because they're interested and they're learning and why do you do this? Why do you say this? What does it mean? But those of us who've been around for a long time in church and on the Jesus faith journey for a long time, we kind of get to a point where we don't ask questions like that anymore. And so an important question for us today is, when is the last time we intentionally positioned ourselves as open-minded learners? whether we're talking about individuals or us as a faith community. When was the last time we positioned ourselves as a student, as somebody who is there to learn? Or, and we can ask it a different way, when was the last time we said, teach me, or teach us to another person, or more importantly, to God? I think we might know if we've reached kind of this perilous state of not learning anymore when we stop asking powerful questions. When we stop asking the really penetrating, transformative questions. Now, we do ask a lot of questions at church, but the questions tend to be something like, who made the coffee today? And the person who laughed the loudest is the person who usually makes the coffee, I think. Or, who's going to chair that committee? ... Filled in by the, because it's probably not going to be me, right? Or, who's going to be in charge of that ministry? ... Or, when we start talking about our tomorrows and our future, there's kind of a question that sometimes gets verbalized, but sometimes it just kind of is unspoken of, how much is this going to disrupt my routine? And those are good questions, kind of, some of them. But they're not powerful questions. They're not seeking questions. They're not transformative questions like what Peter asked Jesus. How often should I forgive? How many times should I forgive? And I think it's interesting that Peter throws out a number. And I think if you read it in this one way, that Peter was expecting his number of 7 times to be like a high number, right? He's like, how many times should I forgive? Like 7? You know, like knowing that that seemed like a high number. And I think maybe he was thinking like Jesus would go, no, like 2 or 3 is enough. But that question, how often should I forgive? How many times should I forgive? In essence, Peter is saying, teach me something, please. I'm still learning. I want to learn this new way of being. Teach me. A few months ago, I had the blessing of being asked by my mentee, a gentleman by the name of Drew. And mentee is such a weird word, and I'm not even sure it's a real word, but I'm his mentor. That makes him my mentee. It's a real word. It sounds too much like candy. Sounds like Mentos, and I don't like it. But my mentee, because it's a real word, and I guess I have to use it, invited me to sit in with him with the district board on committee. No, let's try that again. District committee on ministry. That's what I'm trying to say. And that is sort of the beginning steps for somebody who is on the track to becoming a clergy person. And it's where these candidates are examined for ministry. And in particular, they're examined for readiness for ministry. Are they learning how to preach? Are they learning pastoral care and church administration? Are they learning to pay attention to culture and all of that stuff? And I was the chair of the District Committee on Ministry in Southern Oregon a number of years ago, so I spent a lot of time with these candidates and with these kinds of questions, and we would ask them how their work is going. They were in churches. What do they find rewarding? What do they find challenging? And most importantly, and we would ask this every time, we would ask, what are they learning? What are they learning about themselves as they engaged in ministry? What do they need to do better? What did they find challenging? What did they find frightening or heartbreaking? What were they learning about the nature of church? What were they learning again, most importantly, about God and how God is at work in people's lives and in our community. So at this interview, Drew, my mentee, was asked this powerful question by the chair of that district committee on ministry. And it was one of those questions, when I heard it, it was almost like, in the movies or in like audio drama, there's like the needle that scratches across the record that's like, and everything just kind of stops. It was one of those questions that in my heart, I was like, that is a powerful question. That is a transformative question. That is a question that we need to be asking here. And it's a two-part question. So the chair of that committee looked at Drew, and Drew at that time was serving two different congregations. He was the youth pastor at Portland First, an urban congregation, big, historic, and he was also working at a smaller rural congregation. And the chair of the committee looked at him and said, Drew, what does the good news look like for your people? What does the good news look like for the people sitting in your pews on Sunday? And what does it look like? What does the good news look like for the people who are part of your congregation who can't attend? Who, because of recovering from surgery or physical infirmity or something like that, who can't attend? What does the good news look like for them? And then she asked the second part of the question, which I think is just as powerful, if not more so. She said, what does the good news look like for your neighbors? For the peoples whose homes are literally less than a stone's throw from the church, but we may have never met before. What does the good news look like for them? It's a powerful question, right? It might be the most powerful question that we ever ask ourselves as a faith community. And honestly, if we're not asking that question, I'm not sure what we're doing. And it's one that we absolutely need to be asking ourselves, especially with where we are at as a faith community. As we look at our future, as we look at our choices, what does the good news look like for these, our people? And what does it look like for our neighbors? It's a question that if we are genuine, if we are earnest, if we really mean it when we ask it, it will shape us. And beautifully, it positions us as learners again, doesn't it? As we ask that, because we don't have an answer for it right now. As we ask it, it positions us to be saying, teach us. Are we too old for that? Are we too full of knowledge for that? When Peter asks his question about forgiveness, he gets a surprising answer. One that opens up a horizon of grace. Peter thinks maybe he will be complimented on his question, like, how many times should we forgive? 7 times? And the answer he gets is surprising, because Jesus says, depending on the translation, either 77 times or 70 times 7. And here, I don't think Jesus is expecting Peter to start creating a spreadsheet of keeping track of how many times he's forgiven a specific person. Okay, I'm on number 38. I got how many to go? Jesus intentionally answers him with a crazy number, an absurd number, which just means a lot. Always. So many. How many times should I forgive somebody? 7 times? No. Always. It's a different arithmetic. When we ask powerful questions like what Peter asked, and when we ask about what does good news look like for our neighbors and those around us, the answer that God will opens us up, like that answer of Jesus, to a new way of being, where forgiveness doesn't have limits, and where a few loaves and a few fish feed a multitude, and where a few followers with some passion can and do change the world. As we say, teach us. And as we ask powerful questions, God offers us answers that will always surprise us and guide us to where we need to be. And so today, in our journey with Peter and Jesus, as we draw closer to Easter, let us say in all humility and in all hope, teach us, Lord, we are ready. Amen.